So I appreciate everyone coming out today and taking an hour out of your busy days to learn more about cyber insurance. And we all know cyber's in the news with like Apple and these big companies. But today we really want to focus on how it affects and how it impacts the small to mid-sized companies. Um, because it is happening on a smaller scale and it's not just the large companies that are being affected. So without further ado, I want to introduce Jonathan Sherman. He's a vice president at Evolve, which is one of the largest cyber insurance carriers in the US. And as a vice president, he focused on providing brokers like the Miller Group, the education and cyber expertise we need to further help our clients. And then next, we have Scott Minneman. He's with NetStandard, a local Kansas City IT company, and Scott provides strategic tech solutions for small and mid-sized businesses, and he provides the hands-on experience and expertise with your security and IT needs. Before that, he was a trial attorney, so he focused on litigation, risk, and liability. So welcome, Jonathan and Scott, and thanks for coming out today.
Thank you, Chris.
So I'll just jump right into it. Like Amanda said, we'll do questions at the end. So if you have those, put them in the chat message. But first off, since we have such a wide range of companies, we've got contractors, we've got cities, we've got nonprofits, we've got the whole spectrum. But what are you guys seeing as the most common attacks for small to medium-sized businesses?
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan, we can start with you.
Jonathan, you want to go?
Perfect. Yeah. So a lot has obviously changed over the past year and a half. And I know when we kind of came together to talk about some of the threats that we're seeing, the landscape is dramatically evolving, no pun intended. And what we're seeing are two things. So you've probably had this conversation with somebody or internally, or hopefully you haven't experienced it. But the first is ransomware, which is just a type of strand of malware. And then the other is wire transfer fraud. Believe it or not, they actually make up about 56% of the claims that we handled last year, ransomware being the leading driver in our claims activity. Now, coming along the lines of what's happening with ransomware and what's happening with wire transfer fraud, there's some other things to think about as well. So you think about how this happens, right? So employee error is a big factor, but through phishing attacks, and then also things like business email compromise, we're seeing a lot of as well. So you're seeing attacks happen and threats and vulnerabilities happen across a lot of different areas of your business, but all of this has really been on the rise, and Scott can probably attest to that because of COVID and this transition to what we originally kind of coined as work from home, right? But now it's really working from anywhere and just working remotely. And that's what's dramatically changing the threat landscape and why we're seeing such a rise in these specific attacks.
Yeah, that's exactly in line with what we're seeing as the IT provider and being out there on the front lines all the time. Ransomware is definitely one of the two top, if not the number one top thing to worry about for small to medium businesses, just because of how often it happens and the huge impact when it does. And then, the wire transfer fraud, the business email compromise, we see those a lot too. And the ways that these things are happening is, it's phishing, it's somebody that's on the front line, but a lot of times the companies are either doing outdated forms of configuration, the things that were okay to do 5-10 years ago just aren't okay to do anymore. Like having remote desktop open to the internet, big no-no these days. You're almost guaranteed to get hit if you have that. Not having two-factor authentication on your remote access, having weak password policies, allowing people to reuse passwords or not have to change them for years at a time. All of these things go into these types of attacks. And usually these days, it usually ends up with either ransomware or business email compromise or wire transfer fraud. That's kind of where everything is funneling down to. One little side note on that, I just saw a new report as of last week where one of the big companies that's in the weeds of ransomware recovery, one of the ones that helps facilitate payments when payments need to be made and all of that, they put out quarterly reports on what they're seeing out there in the industry, what kind of attacks they're seeing, and unpatched vulnerabilities is starting to rise as well. And that's of course led by some of these major things that came out last quarter, like SolarWinds, like Exchange, like some of these Apple vulnerabilities. There's any number of them that you can go through. But people that didn't respond quickly enough and apply those patches tended to start getting hit as well. So that's one that we've really got to pay attention to these days too.
Nice, thank you. Jonathan, you had mentioned remote working. How do you think that complicated everything? And I mean, we've got companies doing both now, but I mean, we both know it's not going anywhere. So what are you seeing there?
Yeah, it was such a nuance for a lot of folks. And I was reading an article a few months back, and a gal was being interviewed, and she talked about how in 10 weeks we saw 10 years of change, right? So the timeline just increased exponentially. And it's amazing to think how fast companies adapted. But when Scott and I were chatting, we talked about, yes, you're adapting quickly, but obviously things are going to be missed, and that's going to create new issues for your business, right? Hopefully you addressed everything, but when you work from home, obviously remote desktop protocol, right? Hiding things behind your VPN, stuff like that is very important. But one thing that we start to see a lot of in the cyber market, specifically the insurance market, is people were not implementing MFA, so multi-factor authentication, and trying to simply just secure, their business email accounts, maybe remote login, right, for admin accounts and things along those lines. And that opened up a lot of new vulnerabilities that hackers started to exploit. And Scott mentioning right now, trying to patch up things that you do at your business, right? When you look at technology, you'd be shocked at how many businesses weren't doing that. And I know when COVID happened, we released a big 5 things you should be doing. One of them, patching up software, updating your software, but also things like MFA, password protections, creates just such a new vulnerability that a lot of folks were truthfully just not prepared for. Luckily, it evolved. We work remote, and we've always had the accessibility to do that. And that's something that we were prepared for, but it wasn't because of COVID, right? It was just because of our business model, because that's the way that we've always operated. So for us, it was different than businesses who've never had given somebody a laptop and then just all of a sudden said, hey, you're working from home, get on your personal computer.
Good luck.
And a guy like Scott, Scott probably hears that and has a fire burning inside like that. No, don't do that. So those are some of the things that started happening that had to be addressed.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned MFAs, Scott. What other types of security considerations are there out there?
Well, I mean, that rush to get everyone remote, I think, is a period of time that no IT engineer will ever forget for the rest of their career. They'll remember that period because it was just such a scramble for so many companies all at the same time. And so, different ones based on where they were on the preparedness chart, where they were as far as their previous practices and policies and the things that they had in place, meant that some of them were well prepared. And it's just, okay, fine. Yeah, take your laptop home, turn it on, it'll connect, and it's good because everything's been done already over the years. Or maybe it's a company like Evolve who's always been remote. But for the ones that it wasn't, I mean, I know of companies that told their employees, pick up your desktop computer and your monitor off of your desk and take it home and plug it in. And that was the situation that they were in, just because of what had been done or not done up to that period of time. Their business wasn't prepared for that. And so, everyone had to get there somehow. You didn't really have a choice. You had to get there somehow. But now that that's done, now that you're past that, and especially now that we're kind of coming into this new way of working where there's going to be some people that are always in the office, there's going to be some people that are always remote, there's going to be some that are hybrid, there's any number of different ways of working now. Now you have to go back and reassess all those quick decisions that you made at the time and say, do we need to button this up? Do we need to button this up? Do we need to fix this? Because the way that the controls work now is different. Think about it just like this. For somebody like Evolve, who's always been remote, they have a specific tool set on their laptops at home that's designed for that home environment where there's not going to be a strong firewall in front of it. There's not going to be all these big network protections in front of it. So you put all of that into the machine itself. If you're a company that's always been in the office, a lot of times you have that built into the network. You have hardened servers, you have a really good enterprise grade firewall with intrusion protection and gateway antivirus and all of these things that are set up at the network layer. And then you take that machine and you go home and you don't have that anymore. Well, you put tools on your computer assuming those things are going to be there, which means you're creating a new vulnerability now because the assumptions are different. So you have to go back and reassess those things. If somebody's going to take their laptop from their desk to home, to Starbucks, to the airport, to wherever, they may need a different type of security than somebody who is permanently stationed in the office and never goes anywhere anymore. So just going back and reassessing all of those things that you had to do just to keep the lights on during COVID and making sure that those decisions are in line with what the next 12, 18, 24 months is going to bring, or what kind of adjustments and what kind of enhancements do you need to make?
Mhm.
Jonathan, did you have anything to add from an insurance perspective there? I mean, are you
I
guys requiring remote?
Yeah, I agree with Scott because, at the end of the day, cybersecurity, there's no foolproof plan, but planning is the key, right? And understanding where your exposure lies, sitting down, simply just making a checklist and making sure you're line iteming, okay, what makes sense for us? How do I prioritize this? Where does this lie on the list? And then from an insurance perspective, right? So when you're trying to allocate and move your risk to something else, the cyber insurance market it's hardening, right? And I don't mean to make that sound like an alarm sounding. It's just been a soft market for the past, as long as I can remember, 5 years now, 6 years, and even before that. But what you're going to find with that is a good path to the future. And what I mean by that is there's going to be more requirements, right? So cybersecurity firms and folks like Scott are going to sit down, help you with applications, and then they're going to also help you understand, okay, this is what you need to do. But the reason we're asking all that is because the claims data shows X, Y, and Z. So like MFA, we just talked about it. Believe it or not, our claims data shows you're 5 times less likely to experience a cyber event if you have multi-factor authentication enabled on your email accounts. And that's something that we preach. And then also there's carriers out there who are mandating it right now. So you hear that stuff and it does stink a little bit on the front end. I know there's some businesses who feel like, oh, we can't do that, or it's something, we just don't have the bandwidth to do that. We can't afford to do it. Well, as time goes on here, these are things that are going to be required. And it's nothing new in insurance, right? Your buildings, you're sometimes required to have a sprinkler system. And it's the same concept, except now it's just becoming real for your intangible assets. And with this digital age, more and more, you're going to see some of these requirements come down the pipeline. But again, the whole goal is to mitigate events, make sure once an event happens, we're responding correctly, and also that you're not experiencing something that's way worse than it should have been because of maybe you didn't follow a requirement or you didn't do something proactive.
Yeah. So speaking of requirements, I mean, why do you think small to mid-sized companies are resistant to adding cybersecurity? I mean, obviously there's cost, but I mean, Scott, what else are you seeing there?
Well, for me, I try to look at it as a question of business priorities, because really, as a business owner, as a business leader, as anyone who has to make decisions in a business on a daily basis, you're constantly comparing priorities. Do I do A or do I do B? Do I do C or do I do nothing? Do we replace this vehicle in our fleet, or do we use that money to hire an additional person? Or even in your personal life, it's the same kind of thing. Do I cook dinner tonight or do I pick something up on the way home? It's just a question of what are your priorities at that moment, what matters more to you. And so when it comes to the question of do I improve our cybersecurity or do I do something else or do I do nothing? the reason why I think that most companies don't, in many cases, don't answer that question the quote unquote correct way is because they don't have the right information. They're not understanding that that cybersecurity is a fundamentally different type of threat than most other things that you're dealing with in your business. So, if you think about something, a decision that you might be asked to make, like, do I replace this vehicle in our fleet? What you're doing is you're watching that maintenance, you're watching the way that the fleet operates, and you're seeing, gradually it degrades over time, and you start seeing signs of that decline, and then eventually it's okay. I've seen enough signs, now it's time to do something about it. Or you can apply the same thing to like your service quality, or any number of other ways or things in your business. Cybersecurity isn't really like that, especially these days. It tends to go from 0 to 100 immediately. You don't really have those signs of decline. You don't really have, hey, yeah, I've seen enough messages now that that somebody's trying to get in. I guess now I'll go ahead and improve our security posture. You don't really have those signs in the middle. It's you're fine one day, the next day you are super not fine, and that's the way it presents to you. And so if you're trying to think of it through that same type of lens as the other questions that you're facing, and you're waiting for those signs that, okay, now it's time to do something, you're more than likely going to end up in an insecure spot, having risks that you don't realize that you're taking, because just because you don't see a problem or you don't see those signs doesn't mean you don't have a problem, and doesn't mean you won't have a problem tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and doing everything at once is, I think, impossible. So it's like you're saying, prioritize, right? You got to think about the cost and all of that. And that's a big hurdle that we always get is, oh, it costs too much. And not just insurance, just everything else that you're trying to implement, which I understand, but that's where the prioritization comes into play, because now you can understand, all right, well, maybe we just moved all these people to remote work. MFA should be a priority right now, or vice versa. It could be something else because you're doing something more specific, or you have a big project that's going on, or whatever it may be. But there's a lot of resources out there, right? With cyber insurance policies specifically, you can get value-added resources to become more proactive, or you can go to a third party who can sit down and help you do that stuff. And it's always out there in front of you. You just kind of got to take those steps to do it. I feel like a lot of people don't take that leap of faith, or that jump, because again, they think of costs or time and value, money, and all that stuff, which we do get. It's just a matter of prioritizing is the best thing that I can say about that.
Yeah, and seeing how it affects your business.
Yeah. Don't try to do everything all at once, and don't just try to say, okay, well, this other company down the road did these 4 things, therefore I need to do those exact same 4 things. It's a question of what the risks are to your business, what you're facing, what things are likely to come for you, what kind of data you have, who might care about that data, what might happen if it gets out. All of these questions are very, very custom to you and custom to your business and your industry specifically. And so, there is no such thing as, here, if you do this checklist, no matter how long it is, if you do everything on this checklist, you are guaranteed secure. It's not a thing. You have to really look at it and tailor that for you based on the things that are the highest risk, highest reward, at each point in time. Don't do everything, rank things in order, but and just think those things through. But what I was trying to say at the beginning is just don't think that because nothing is happening that that's okay, that you're safe, because it's just different.
Yeah, and especially too, when an event does occur, I hate when we get submissions to us where people have had prior events and then they explain what happened and now what they're doing, but it's always that, oh, we wish we would have done this moment, or that situation where after the event, we noticed we had these issues. And a good example I can give is we have an agency we work with a ton, and I'm not going to get too specific on where they are regionally, but they had that exact scenario where they actually had a cyber event, completely shut down their business. And the CEO of the company, when he was talking to us, just said, I didn't realize how much, once the cost happened, it was $100,000 in cost, but how unorganized our data was and how things weren't communicating properly, because the way that the event encrypted their systems, it just shut down everything. and the way that everything was communicating, when they went to rebuild all of their data and their systems and everything, it was just a mess. It was a total mess. And he was shocked at how they never addressed it. But it's because it wasn't a priority, right? And you think everything's fine until something happens, and now business just can't even operate anymore. And it's not fun having to deal with those calls, but also to see those events occur. So prioritizing is a good thing.
You bring up a good point. So, I mean, one of you want to talk about what it's like when a cyber attack happens? I mean, we talked about ransomware.
Yeah, I can talk about that. And let's use ransomware because that's a thing that happens all the time to businesses of all sizes. Every day companies are falling for this, and you can see it in the news and everything else. And when it happens, it's hugely expensive to recover, both in terms of direct costs, indirect costs, lost business, everything else. So let's talk about that. The way that it usually first presents, like you first realize that you have a ransomware incident when somebody can't get into something. They try to open up a file on the network and that file won't open, or they're trying to connect to a database and they come up with a database error. Something like that happens. It just looks like an ordinary error at first. So you call your IT person, whether they're down the hall, down the street, or in another city, wherever they are, you call your IT person. They get in and look at it and are usually able to tell pretty quickly that, okay, no, this is not just an ordinary issue, this is ransomware. When that happens, there's a flurry of activity all at once. And that can be anytime, day or night. We tend to see ransomware attacks nights and weekends more than we do during business hours. And there's a couple reasons for this. First off, the attackers know that there's fewer defenders around, nights and weekends. Most people are home. And then also a lot of them come from Eastern Europe, Asia, Russia, places like that, where that is their daytime. So it just happens to line up pretty well that it's nights and weekends here. I mean, there's one incident that I can think of where a company I know called us, it was 2 a.m. on like a Tuesday, I think. Another one that, this one was not fun, called us at 5 a.m. on Christmas morning last year. And so now we've got an incident to work on Christmas morning. I've got an incident ticket in the system from that company dated 12/25. And this is when it happens, because they know that there's the fewest number of defenders there. But when you call IT, they're going to jump on it immediately. Whatever time, day or night or weekend that happens to be, because there's always a chance that you've seen it in the middle of the process. And if they can get in and they can mitigate it right away, they can reduce the amount of damage done. So they're going to jump on it right away. By the way, if this ever happens to you and you have an IT person that doesn't jump on it right away, call somebody else, because they could still potentially get in and stop it from getting worse. And that's the first step. They're going to bring everyone that they possibly can into it to try to address, is this still happening? Is it still getting worse? Or is it fully encrypted? Is it complete? And they want to get that to a state where nothing is getting worse anymore. Let's pull the plug from the internet. Let's take all the systems offline. Let's completely take down the network. Let's do things like that to make sure that, okay, we're just going to stop it from getting worse. Then you take a step back and you assess. You look at the situation, look at the damage that's there, what all is hit, what isn't hit. Do we have insurance? Do we not have insurance? If you have insurance, this is the step where you'll call the insurance company. You'll put in that claim for them. We'll go through the original triage first. We got to stop it from getting worse, but then we'll call insurance as one of these first steps, because a lot of times there are, maybe requirements that you have to follow in order to have a successful claim. A lot of times the insurance company has resources that can help. Like they'll have specialized security incident response that they can call and bring in, as a covered benefit under the policy, things like that. So we try to get them involved, as early as possible at that very first assessment step. Do we need to contact law enforcement? Sometimes that may be yes, sometimes that may be no, but we'll address that question then. Like I said, see what kind of backups you have. Are your backups successful? Did the attackers get into the backups and destroy them? Because they try to do that too. Are the backups recoverable? Is that an option here? All of these things to say, where are we? Then we'll put together a plan, start executing on that plan, and restore and recover. Get you back up to where you need to be. That recovery plan, I have never seen take less than a week. Usually, it's more like 3 or 4. And I'm saying, there are companies that I know of that have 24-hour critical functions, like cannot be down functions, and we're still down anyway because it's just not possible to get back up immediately. Even if you have a good backup, you still have to wait for it to restore. You have to get everyone reconnected to it. Like, there are things you have to go through. And so I've never seen an incident where somebody has been fully hit with ransomware and we're able to get back up and running in less than a week. It's almost unheard of, short of you can have things like a fully redundant backup site and that kind of stuff that can avoid that. But as far as the actual recovery itself, so you've got all of that downtime, you've got all of that lost business revenue, you've got all of those costs that go with that. You've got to pay for the recovery, you've got to pay for investigators. Sometimes you have to pay for forensics, depends on what kind of policy you may or may not have. All of these different things that go into it. And in some cases, if you are in a situation where you have to pay the ransom, the average ransom is over $200,000 now. It's just hugely overwhelming when you actually get hit with a ransomware attack. Jonathan, is that in line with what you're seeing, or what are you guys seeing?
Or Scott, real quick, just for us lay people not in the IT world, Maria asked, how's it become evident at 2 a.m. that there's a cyber breach? I mean, how do you guys know? Just what's the background there?
There's a number of ways that you could know. If you're a 24-hour shop, one of your people is probably going to notice. Other than that, if it takes down your website, if your website is hosted there and it takes that down, maybe somebody notices, or you have some kind of alarm system on that. Or if you have an IT provider like NetStandard, or there's a number of companies like us, there may be alerts that we get, there may be things that trigger us, or hey, we can notice it before you do. Or what happens to a lot of companies is you don't notice it at 2 a.m., you notice it at 8 a.m. When that next person comes in and tries to log into their computer and they get an error that they can't log in, something like that. So sometimes you don't notice it right away, but whatever time that is, it's important to try to jump on it at that earliest opportunity, whenever it's first noticed, because going through and encrypting every server and every file and every computer in your network takes time. It's not instantaneous. And so if you can catch it in the middle of that process, you can save some resources from even being hit to begin with.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jonathan.
And to add to that, it's hard for some businesses here and folks who've maybe never experienced a cyber event, it's hard to prepare for something, right, that you've never experienced, and there's exercises to prepare you for it. But that, to me, is kind of the starting point, is understanding what your own incident response plan is, because then once the event happens, right, you want it to feel like you are prepared for it. And exactly like Scott said, you know exactly who to call, who should be getting involved, at what cost, things maybe you've pre-negotiated or discussed with your IT provider or an outside firm that you may not be using. Because I have had situations where someone's called us, a broker being so that someone saying, my client, they don't have a cyber policy. What are they supposed to do? And I say, well, I can get you a referral, but now you're looking at a supply and demand, issue, and someone could charge you more than you expect. But speaking from an insurance perspective, right, like Scott said, you respond, your team gets involved, you look at everything, and then we have a hotline where we field our cyber events. So everyone does this differently. Evolve is unique in the space, or one of the unique players, because we do have our own in-house team. What's nice about that is when you call that hotline, you're dealing with the IT experts, security experts, You're also going to get a cyber claims adjuster. So someone who understands the policy very well, handles these events, and you're not, going to be dealing with some claims adjuster who could be a good claims adjuster, but maybe handling other lines of insurance as well. So maybe you just get pushed over to a vendor, and then at that point, things can be delayed. Time is money. So what we try to do is respond in that manner, identify what's happening. We do work hand in hand with other IT firms. So if your business is working with someone like Scott and they, are looking at the event and they say, hey, we've been working on this for 8 hours, 5 hours, whatever it is, this is what we've identified. Well, we might have another, piece of information that they don't have, or something to add to what they've already done. And then it kind of follows the same suit, right? You identify again what happened. Is it ransomware? So if it is a ransomware attack, has everything been encrypted? Do you have backups? If you've got backups, are we able to get your business back up and running? If not, are we about to have to pay a ransom? And then you go through that entire process, which is always interesting. We've had a ton of different ransomware attacks where you actually, I've seen people negotiate ransoms down, from $300,000 to $150,000. Or we had a demand. It was at the beginning or the middle of last year, so in the summertime, it was a $3 million extortion demand that was negotiated down. But it was a scenario where the whole entire company was shut down. Backups were infected. Everything was just totally shut down. So our hands were really tied, and we had to get them back up and running. So stuff like that will happen. It all plays out. But again, the cyber policy, though, we talk about, Scott mentioned business income loss. So loss of time, loss of revenue, forensic billables, data breach attorney billables, your own time. So if you have to rebuild your data, if it turns into that type of event, those things are covered under a good standalone cyber policy. It's just, again, like I said, you really got to identify before something happens what your plan of response is and how your policy is going to respond as well, which you should talk to your insurance broker, talk to your insurance carrier, because they want you to ask those questions. They want you to be proactive. So if something does happen, everyone's on the same page and nobody's just fighting each other over some things that don't need to be fought over, right? They could have been addressed prior to an event occurring.
You had
Hey,
mentioned.
Chris,
Oh,
can
yep.
I jump on that real quick? Just on
Yeah.
Jonathan, you mentioned sometimes you do have to pay the ransom, you do have to pay the extortion. And so, what I want to talk about what happens after that when somebody does actually in fact pay. What happens is the attacker is telling them, hey, pay us this ransom. If you pay us this amount, we'll give you the decryption key. You'll be right back up and going. That is not true. That is not true. They will probably give you the decryption key. That part is true. They will probably give you that thing. But then you have to go through, and just like I said, it takes time to go through and encrypt every server, every file, every computer. It takes time to go through and do all that. Now you have to do that whole process again through the decryption, which is an inherently slower process than encryption. And so if any of you have ever been in a situation where you've had to pay, you know what I'm talking about. It is not, hey, they pay, we pay at noon, we get the key at 1, and we're back up at 4. It's more like we pay at noon, we get the key at 1, and we're back up 4 days from now. It is not a short process, even after you pay that. And I just wanted to say that because I think there's some misconception out there about, well, if it's just faster to just pay, then let's just pay because I have insurance to cover it anyway. And then we'll be up and running faster. You won't necessarily be up and running faster. You might be, but you probably won't be.
Yeah, and the events, I was gonna say, the response just does take time. I'm with you on that. A lot of times when we have claims, people just don't realize, what's happening. And I always make the joke, it's not like you're just clicking the refresh button and everyone's, back up and running. There's so much more that's happening throughout that whole process.
I mean, from your guys' perspective, how can you, to be a little cynical here, how can you trust that once they get paid that they're going to do what they say they're going to do?
You can't really trust it other than their reputation is on the line. And for the most part, like the ransomware industry, for lack of a better word, but is really consolidated into a small handful of fewer than probably about 10 major syndicates that do this. And they know that if people are paying them and they're not giving that key over, they're not upholding their end of the bargain, that's going to get out. People are going to start talking about that, and it's going to impact future payments. So they do kind of recognize, I mean, they're very much like a business, in these other countries, and it's really unfortunate that it's like that. But they really operate a lot like businesses these days, because they're not actively being hunted by their local police. They're just not. So they have offices and business hours, and they hire and fire employees, and they have affiliates that they work with and pay commission to, and it's really a whole business. And both fortunately and unfortunately, they do recognize that. So more often than not, they do actually do what they say they're going to do. You can't know that for sure, and if they don't, there's nothing you can do about it. Like, you cannot get that money back.
Yeah. And figuring out what you need to do comes from due diligence. All these, from a cyber insurance perspective, all the different markets out there have that due diligence process, identifying what type of malware it is. Are you going to pay? Are you not going to pay? Doing things according to the book. But it's like Scott said, you don't really know. But I've heard stories at our conferences and the seminars that we host with some of our vendors where they go in and talk to these threat actors in these groups, and there's reoccurring people who show up and they don't recognize each other physically because they can't see each other, but through communication and through events that they've seen before, they recognize, oh, I know this group, I know what they typically look for, or I know that they actually hold up their end of the bargain, and they'll let the business, they'll walk away from the business. But it's still crazy because it is crime at the end of the day, right? It's a criminal. It's another person, but they're extorting you. So.
Yeah, we haven't really touched on the data exfiltration element of ransomware these days. But kind of goes back into your question there, Chris. One of the major tactics, and this is really new in the past 6 to 12 months, not brand new, but it's gone from being maybe 10% of the time to probably like 80% of the time now. When they're in your network and they're starting to encrypt everything, they also will copy a full set of your data out to them. They will leak that data and steal it. And the idea is, if they just encrypt, well, if you've got good backups and a little bit of patience, I mean, you can recover and you don't have to pay them. And people were starting to do that. Like, we don't want to pay them. Jonathan doesn't want to pay them. Nobody wants to pay them. It just makes the problem worse. But they figured out that if they steal your data at the same time, they can also hold that for ransom and say, if you don't pay me, I'm going to publish this data publicly. And that may be embarrassing for your business. You may, if you have PHI, you may have HIPAA violations. It may put you in jeopardy of any other, GDPR, CCPA, some of those kind of things. Maybe you have sensitive IP that's very valuable. Now your competitors have it. They will hold that for ransom as well. And so that goes into that same question you just asked, Chris. When they say, pay us $3 million and we'll delete this data that we stole, how do you know they actually do it? Well, you don't. Usually they do, but sometimes they don't, and you don't know which one you're going to be.
Yeah, and that's what's I know we talked about a little bit, but in Washington D.C. that's happening right now at their police department, where they have, last time I read about it, it was informant information that are in the gangs, and they're threatening the city, saying they're going to release the informants' names to the gangs to kind of tell them, hey, these are the people that are out there. And then also Apple, it happened with one of their manufacturers. They got some of their blueprints, and we released an article on that, but they hacked the manufacturer and they're extorting Apple via the manufacturer. They're saying, Apple, you have to pay the $50 million ransom so we don't release your blueprints. So it's we call it double extortion, but it's crazy. And it's that exfiltration tactic that we're seeing more and more of.
The DC police example is really interesting because I think that got resolved. Like suddenly all of that kind of disappeared off of the threat actor site. But then it was replaced with a message from that group, that gang that was behind it, saying, you know what? I don't think we're going to even bother with encryption anymore. We're just going to steal the data and threaten to leak it. And that's the extent of our ransomware now. So I mean, there's one of the major groups out there that's fully in to that side of it and not even bothering with the encryption anymore. I think we're going to see more of that. Encryption's
Yeah.
still going to be a thing, but there's going to be a few big groups out there like this one that just go purely for the data stealing and the data leaking, and just don't even bother with the other part.
Which is it's a privacy issue though, like you touched on, and that's frightening because when you look at claims data from cyber insurance markets and everybody out there, a lot of the costs are typically associated with first party losses. And for those of you that don't know what that means, that just means your direct out of pocket costs associated with an event. So think about IT security billables, right? Data breach attorney billables, maybe loss of income, ransomware demands, right? Being extorted, all that good stuff. Now you have to think about the other cost, which is what if an investigation happens and I'm fined and penalized because I just lost data or that information was leaked. Now I'm being sued because of that or whatever it turns into, which is a very, very big privacy exposure as well.
So it's no longer just, hey, I take credit cards online. I need cyber insurance. I've got employee records. I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah.
And moving on to our next question is that small to mid-sized companies often don't have the budget for an IT person, or they don't have time because they're so buried in their own work. I mean, these are some real threats that they're not thinking of. I mean, what types of things can they be doing because this is scary stuff. And how can they sort of mitigate that?
Yeah. On the privacy issue, that is obviously contractual and you need to understand your contracts with your vendors and who you're working with and, looking a little bit more past, what can they do for me? But also what do they want from me as well? Like what data am I giving them access to? What happens if that data is accessed through their network, through my network, who's responsible? And then on the other side too, understanding, like we said, prioritizing your risk because everybody is different, but there's so many things to do immediately that I think are from a cost perspective that are low, like multi-factor authentication, right? It may not be free for everybody, but I think the biggest cost you're going to find is time and effort and having a firm come in and help you with it. But Evolve, for perspective, we have it on everything, even on my personal stuff like Gmail, social media, banking. I have MFA and act on everything because I'm totally afraid of someone stealing my identity or taking my, information from me. So those are places to start. And also too, Scott might be able to touch on this as well when he goes here, but employee training, it's so effective and it's something that a lot of people still to this date just seem to not do, but cyber policies have that resource as well if you're looking for it. But doing campaigns and sequences and actually trying to maybe convince people that, hey, this is a real email, you should click on it, but it's just your IT team trying to train people and build your human firewall is what one of our vendors refers to. And then automating training. You can send out videos with little games at the end of it, right? And things like that. Those to me are easy ways to start looking at your risk and identifying what obviously needs to be prioritized because you can't do it all and no one has enough money to just continue to do it all. There's other things that are important as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you start with some of the basics, like apply MFA to all of your remote access. Make sure your email, your VPN, your remote desktop is all protected with MFA. Use secure remote forms. Make sure your systems are patched and upgraded. Don't run unsupported stuff. And then you're exactly right, Jonathan. Employee awareness training is very, very effective because so many things start with someone clicked on an email that they shouldn't have because they didn't know enough to recognize, like they weren't equipped to be able to recognize that that's not a good email. And so being able to do those basics and like Jonathan said, and very early on, a lot of the insurance policies and application forms are asking some of these basic questions. And so, we're really working as an industry to try to get everyone up to that basic standard. But then beyond that, if you just do the basics, you're going to be reasonably protected, but not really protected. You've really got to get into, what matters for your business. And that's where it gets really overwhelming in a hurry. I get it. It really does get overwhelming. So here's where I would suggest to start. You can always, ask experts, whatever. But here's where you really want to start with that. Think about what data you have and where that data is, because that's really what cyber attacks are mostly about. It's about your data. And so understand what you have, where it is, and how that might be valuable. Think about, your on-site servers. Think about the laptops that may come in and out of your building. Think about your cloud services, not just your major vendors. Like maybe you've got a program that's hosted with your line of business vendor, or maybe you use something like Salesforce, or use Microsoft 365 or G Suite or something like that. Obviously all of those places have data, but in most companies, there's a lot of smaller ones too that have it. Maybe you've got something for marketing animation or automation. Maybe you've got something that's watching clicks on your website. Those things have data that potentially could be valuable. Make sure that you understand where all of those things are. And one that's really, I think, underappreciated in a lot of places is personal cloud storage. Because here's how it usually presents. You have an employee who, and you don't want to discourage this, but they're trying to get ahead. They're trying to, make sure that they're getting all their stuff done. And so they say, well, if I take this file that I'm working on, this Excel sheet, this Word file, this drawing, this whatever it is, and I email it to myself at home, then I can work on it this weekend. And I'm helping out the business. I'm getting ahead. I'm, making sure that the business is in a better position on Monday because I worked on this thing over the weekend. Or they put it in their Dropbox, or they put it in their Google Drive or whatever. Well, now you have company data in that outside personal location. And is that something that, maybe that's okay with your business? Maybe it's not, but think about it. Make sure that you understand all of those places that your data exists, because with that understanding, you can start tailoring that security solution to be the things that really make a difference for your company, and not just, hey, I'm putting this in because the guy down the road did the same thing. Maybe you don't have the same threat as what he does. And it all starts with, what data do you have and where is that data located?
Nice. So we're going to jump into some audience questions here in a second, but just wanted to do a little housekeeping, that everyone will get a link to this recording either tomorrow or later this week from Amanda. And then also we'll provide some additional resources from both Evolve and NetStandard. So for those of you who are able to stay on, we've got the first question would be probably more towards Jonathan. How do I know if I'm covered under my insurance if a cyber attack were to happen? And then second part of that is, how much coverage should a company have?
Yeah, so with cyber insurance, the first thing I recommend is obviously talking to your insurance professional who advises you. Take a look at if you have a standalone policy, and if you don't, why is that not the case, and what is that other insurance policy going to provide you? Is it something that's added into maybe your business owner's policy, or attached to your GL, or maybe management liability policy that you've got some cyber thrown in, and then doing a comparison as to what is being covered with that insurance professional and what else you think may need to be addressed. That's something that sounds really basic, but you'd be shocked at how many people just don't take that step, because obviously understanding what's going to trigger the policy is very important, whether it's a cyber event trigger, which there should be, maybe it's a data breach trigger, maybe it's something else that could limit coverage for you. And also understanding your exposure. So if business interruption is something you're worried about, and a business that's down for a week or 2 weeks, like Scott said, not fully operational, how much money are you losing? well, do you even have business interruption coverage that's triggered by a cyber event, or are you just going to kind of be fronting the bill for yourself with that type of risk and that type of event? Now, obviously, understanding how much money it's going to cost, I don't have a number I can give you exactly because everyone's different. It's very case by case, but there are resources out there like data breach calculators that help pull together different data points from claims that are out there that have happened and help you kind of identify what the cost could be per, record that's lost. So if you're in the healthcare industry, how much does it cost to lose a piece of healthcare information or a credit card, things like that. So really trying to use a data breach calculator, understand how much it's going to cost you if you have a data breach, and then also how much money you could lose, right? Revenue and business interruption. But you really got to start with doing a comparison with your insurance broker. That's the number one place to start, in my opinion, because when we started, there was a handful of cyber markets out there. Now there's hundreds of different markets, and everybody does something different, and no form is the same right now. So that's hopefully going to change over the next few years, but right now that's just the case.
Thanks. Scott, the next one's from Julie. Do you have a recommended AV or endpoint protection suite for the road warriors? She's using Trend Micro right now.
Just like with most things in security, there's no one size fits all solution. There are a number of them that are very good, and Trend Micro is very good as well. But what you really need to do is talk to your IT person and assess it in context of what else you have, because not every antivirus or not every tool just in general provides every different type of protection that there is out there. I mean, there's not really this is one agent that you can install that does literally everything you could ever imagine, because that'd be too big. They wouldn't be good at all of those things. And so what you do is you try to look at the portfolio of them. So, okay, we've got Trend Micro, but what else do we have next to it? That's able to help complement that. Trend Micro on its own is a very good, well-respected, always ranks high on the Gartner reports. Very good program, but just saying I have Trend Micro, therefore I'm good and covered, may or may not be the case, just depending on your company and what else you have and what your overall context is.
Thank you. We've sort of already addressed this, but the last one we'll probably do is what can a company do to be proactive in regards to cybersecurity? So, I mean, we've sort of addressed that, but do you have any final comments on that for either of you?
I would say, just in addition to, the things that I said earlier, understand your data and, do the basics, patch, MFA, train, that kind of thing. Just don't be the easiest target on the block. It's never going to be impossible for somebody to get in. I mean, there are, intrusions that come in the news all the time where it sounds like, this should literally have not been possible. Like the SolarWinds thing that potentially impacted even some classified networks. Well, that shouldn't even be possible, but somehow it was. And there's incidents in other countries like in Iran where there's a nuclear facility that's not even connected to the internet at all. There's not even an internet connection into the building, and a cybersecurity incident came in and destroyed a bunch of their equipment. Things that don't even seem possible do actually happen. And I'm not saying that to say that it's impossible. I'm saying that to say that there's no such thing as absolutely 100%. But what you can do, because these attackers are trying to be businesses, are trying to make money, they want to keep their effort as low as possible, keeps their cost of the attack as low as possible. And so if you put enough hurdles in their way, you put enough defenses, you have that layered security to where maybe it would be technically possible if they sat there and hacked on your system for 3 weeks, but if they can get the guy down the street in 3 hours, they're going to give up on you and go get them instead. Don't be that guy. Don't be the easiest target. Put up enough of those hurdles that that you dissuade them from really spending the effort that it would take in order to get around what you've done.
Mhm. Yeah, and from a insurance perspective, just know, like I mentioned, there's a lot of resources that come with the policy. So make sure you're actually using them, and they should be free. So that's the thing I would always talk to your broker about if you have a cyber policy. Hey, do you have resources as an agency that I can access? Also, does my policy provide some of those resources? And what we touched on earlier, prioritize your risk, make sure you actually start addressing it. And that could be as simple as opening the book, looking at your incident response plan and going, wow, we haven't recreated our incident response plan since pre-COVID. We should probably do that because I guarantee a lot of things have changed for your business, right? And again, it's like I said, you'd be shocked at how many people don't do that, but that can open up the door to having conversations with folks like Scott and saying, okay, well, X, Y, and Z is what we need to focus on today. And, we'll create those hurdles. And so the threat actors can't get to you, or hopefully get to you if there's a threat made on your business, right? So start with prioritizing is a big thing.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. And I'll send it back to Amanda to wrap things up.
Yeah, actually, we had one last question. We have 3 minutes. If you can, Maria asked, what are some good options for backing up data?
Okay, yeah, I can take that. It's going to start with the question that I have of where is your data? The solutions for backing it up, if it's in a server in your building, or if it's hosted in OneDrive with Microsoft 365 are going to be different. But some things that you really want to look out for are, you want to make sure that you have at least a daily snapshot, to where you can go back to, any day in time over the past, X number of weeks or months. You don't want to just say, hey, yeah, I've got this backed up every month and I'm good. Like, no, you want it to be at least daily. And most importantly, I guess other than that, but really most importantly, make sure that it's considered offline. Here's what I mean by that. If somebody's sitting at a desk in your network, including your IT person, if they can access that backup from their computer, then if an attacker gets into your network, they can access that backup and they can destroy it. So you want to make sure that it's offline and unavailable. Usually this means offsite, in the cloud somewhere or with a provider or something else. But you want to make sure that you have a copy of your data on a daily basis that you can't touch, because if you can't touch it, an attacker can't touch it, and that makes it more reliable when you have an incident.
Okay, well, it is almost 2 o'clock. So I want to thank everybody real quick before you rush off. Thank you for coming today. Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Jonathan and Chris. Please watch your email for a message from me. It will have a link to this recording, some resources that Jonathan and Scott have given us for you guys. And there will also be a super quick feedback survey if you could take just a minute to let us know how today went. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and have a great afternoon.